Great. Well, welcome everyone. Um, happy happy Sunday and happy New Year to everyone. Hope you all had a good and rejuvenating holiday season. Good New Year, and welcome to this Sunday morning meditation. I've been teaching on Sunday morning at this time going back 25 years now to I think 2000, and it's been an IMCW class I think since 2003, and it's kind of a hybrid insight meditation community of Washington and Center for Mindful Living class. It was CML is part of IMCW, but also kind of very independent in many ways in terms of our programs and in other areas. And we welcome everyone, and hope whoever you are and wherever you're coming from, and however you show up in the world, that you feel welcome here. And I want to welcome everyone. And that also includes in these divided times, whatever views and opinions and beliefs you bring to the world at this time. I want everyone to feel welcome. And it's a good time at this beginning of the year, I think, for us to reflect on our practice. So the talk I'm going to share with you today is about taking refuge and where we can find real security, and reliability in this very changing and very unreliable world, a world that can't, promise us lasting satisfaction. Where do we find our ground? And that's kind of what we'll be exploring today. And I'll just share that the format will begin with a period of meditation, be about 20 minutes or so. Then Emily will lead us in some gentle mindful movement. Thanks as always, Emily. It's always lovely to get into the body, because we can get very caught up in the coconut, as it were, in our heads, in our thoughts, in our narratives and all of that. So coming into the body is the first foundation of mindfulness, and it's the body's always in the present moment. So coming back, taking time to come back to the body is really central to our practice. Then we'll have the talk, which will be about 30, maybe 35 minutes or so, hopefully. And then we'll have hopefully again, some time for sharing questions, whatever folks would like to raise and or kind of bring up and share. So we'll begin with the meditation, and before we actually get into the sit, I just share just a few reflections on the meditation itself. In the Buddhist tradition and in other traditions of meditation as well, there are many different forms of meditation. And in many of these forms, we're trying to cultivate or develop particular states of heart and mind or body, whatever. For example, if we're doing a concentration meditation, we're trying to, in a gentle and kind way, get the mind really focused and one-pointed, and malleable, but also, that focus. And so we're trying to in a sense, we're trying to create a state or generate or cultivate a state. Similarly, if we're cultivating loving kindness or compassion, we're inviting those qualities to arise in us, you know. But with mindfulness meditation, we're not really, excuse me, we're not trying to develop any particular state. We're not, calm may be part of what comes up, or joy may be part of what comes up, but it's not the states that we're looking for. What we're cultivating is a way of being with our experience. Um, and essentially that is one of welcoming or accepting whatever is arising in the body and the heart and the mind. So what that kind of means is that we're bringing, I think of it as a kind of non-controlling attitude to our experience. We're not trying to make it something, or change it from something, but we're really allowing what is here to be here, to come and to go when things are ready to go. So not clinging to anything, not pushing anything away, not judging what's happening for us, but bringing this open, receptive awareness to our experience. So with that, I just invite you to come into a posture that's comfortable and relaxed. Sitting with your back straight. Maybe let your hands rest comfortably in your lap or on your knees or on your thighs. Maybe inviting the shoulders to relax. Letting the chest be open so you can breathe easily. And if you're comfortable, you could let your eyes gently close, let your attention come inward. Or if you prefer, you can just keep your eyes open with a soft, unfocused gaze. And you might find it helpful to just take a few longer, deeper breaths. It's a nice, full, deep in-breath, filling the chest, filling the lungs. And then a long, slow out-breath, releasing, letting go on the out-breath. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. Letting the deeper breathing help you just to settle into being here. Being here and open to whatever is present for you right now. And if you feel comfortable, you might invite a smile or a half smile, activating the muscles around your eyes and around your mouth. Maybe thinking of someone or something that brings you some joy or happiness. Just inviting the smile, maybe inviting the smile down into your body, into the heart area. When we do this, we gladden the mind, gladden the heart. We bring, create the conditions for happiness, joy to be present. That can be helpful as we begin the meditation. Just letting the breath be as it is, just returning to its natural rhythm. Breathing in, breathing out. As you breathe in, just know you're breathing in. And as you breathe out, know you're breathing out. We can see this practice as really a practice of attunement, attuning ourselves like we would with, when we find the dial on a radio and tune into a particular station. We can tune into different aspects of our experience. So you might just tune into your body right now and just notice anything that stands out for you. Maybe there's some tension in a particular area of the body. You can just let your awareness come to that area and notice what feelings are present and just let them come, let them be. When they're ready, let them go. And maybe you notice something in another area, maybe some excitement or some energy, and just let your attention kind of tune into that. Maybe there's a feeling of pressure, where the body touches the chair or the feet touch the floor. You can tune into that, just letting the sensations come and go in their own time. Just allowing whatever is present to be here, to come and go in its own time. So we're not holding on to anything, not pushing anything away, not judging our experience, resisting it. It's simply being aware of it with kindness. And in the same way as you tune into the body, you might now tune into your mood or emotions. Notice what's present, if anything, right now. There might be a sense of peace, or there could be some sadness, or some tension or worry. See if you can again make space for whatever is here right now. Again, letting whatever feelings, sensations, thoughts, whatever's present, letting them come and go in their own time. You might, if you feel ready, tune into the mind. Tune into noticing whether there's a lot of thinking in the mind or whether the mind is fairly settled and calm. However it is, just allow that to be as it is. So we're putting our awareness at the center, making our awareness or resting in awareness may be a better way, and tuning it to where we want to pay attention. And if you find yourself pulled into a lot of thinking, just choose to let the thoughts go, not follow them, and just come back to the awareness. Just notice the difference between awareness of thinking and being caught up in thought, pulled along by our thoughts. So just resting in this attitude of accepting with kindness whatever is arising. You might find it helpful to just let your attention rest on your breathing, in breath and out breath, and let that be your home base where you rest your attention. Something strong calls for your attention, you can move to that. Be aware of it. When it passes, just come back to the breath again. Just notice where your attention is right now. And any time you notice that you're caught up in thinking, planning, or remembering, or daydreaming, just gently and kindly let your awareness come back to the body, come back to the breath, come back to this moment, being here. Might just take a moment to check in with your body and notice if there's any area where there might be some tension or some kind of unconscious holding, resisting, and invite that area to relax. Just relax into being here. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, just simply to be here with your experience as it is. And just noticing where the attention is right now. And knowing that you can begin again in any moment, no matter how many times the mind has gone off or for how long, can always just come back to this breath, this feeling, this sound, this moment. I want to finish with a poem that Cornelius Eady read at Zoran Mandami's inauguration as mayor of New York City. It's a poem called Proof. You have to imagine it. Who said you were too dark, too large, too queer, too loud? Who said you were too poor, too strange, too fat? You have to imagine it. Who said you must keep quiet? Who heard your story, then rolled their eyes? Who tried to change your name to invisible? You've got to imagine it. Who heard your name and refused to pronounce it? Who checked their watch and said, not now? James Baldwin said, the place in which I fit will not exist until I make it. New York, city of invention, roiling town, refresher and renewer. New York, city of the real, where the canyons whisper in 100 tongues. New York, where your lucky self waits for your arrival, where there is always soil for your root. This is our time, the taste of us, the spice of us, the hollers and the rhythms and the beats of us, and the echo of our ancestors who made certain we know who we are. City of insistence, city of resistance, you have to imagine. An army that wins without firing a bullet, a joy that wears down the rock of no. Up from insults, up from blocked doors, up from trick bags, up from fear, up from shame, up from the way it was done before. You have to imagine that space they said wasn't yours, the time they said you'd never own, the invisible city lit on its way. This moment is our proof. Thank you. And we'll have a period of movement with Emily. So over to you, Emily.
For that.
Yeah. Let me just change the setting here. So for the talk today, I was thinking, of what would be helpful as we begin the new year. And the new year is a great time for us, excuse me, great time for us to kind of reflect and take stock of where we are, and particularly to think about our intentions, what's important for us in the time ahead. And so I thought today a talk on taking refuge, and particularly today taking refuge in the Dharma, in the teachings. It's kind of has a broad range of meaning. Taking refuge in the teachings is kind of very specific aspect, if you like, of refuge. But more broadly, it's taking refuge in the truth, taking refuge in life itself, the way things are. And what I want to really get at today is, emphasize today, is the importance of taking refuge, the importance of putting our commitment to our spiritual practice really at the center of our lives. how important that is for us. So I wanna share some reflections on that today, and begin just by saying that refuge in the Dharma is, in Buddhist teachings, is one of the three Buddhist refuges. Many of you be familiar with that, the three refuges, but I'll just briefly name them and describe them. First of all, in Buddhism, a refuge is understood to be, and this is much like it is in everyday, kind of in our everyday understanding of refuge, it's really a place of safety or security or well-being that one can go to, particularly in times of difficulty or danger. You know, it's something that we can, rely on. We have our word, obviously, to be a refugee would be to find a place of refuge, a place of safety, away from war, violence, oppression, etc., all of the things that people, are often escaping from and finding refuge. And in the spiritual sense, it has a similar connotation, the sense of something, where can we go in the midst of the turbulence, in the midst of all of the challenges of the time we're living in? What is reliable? What is safe? What can we rely on? What can be a refuge, a genuine spiritual refuge for us? And so that's what this kind of taking refuge refers to, speaks of. So the three refuges, the first, and each of these refuges can be looked at in both kind of more of an external way and more of an internal or inner way. So the first refuge is refuge in the Buddha, and that can refer to finding support, finding safety, if you like, in this historical Buddha, this human being who awakened, who struggled and sought to find the end of suffering, and ultimately did awaken to the deepest freedom that's possible in this human life. That's my understanding of his realization. And that we can be inspired by that we can see that as an example for us. We say, oh yeah, this is the Buddha, and I can follow that path. On an inner level, a kind of more interior level, refuge in the Buddha can be understood as taking refuge in our own potential, our own capacity for awakening. Taking refuge in the fact that we ourselves, each one of us, has the capacity to wake up and to actually do the work of waking up. That's kind of more the inner, internal level of taking refuge in our potential to wake up. The second refuge, which we emphasizing today, refuge in the Dharma, is, on one level, it's taking refuge in the Buddha's teachings as a reliable path to freedom, but also that we can actually embody these teachings. We can transform ourselves through these teachings, so that in that more internal way, we can take refuge in the teachings. And as I'll be talking about, it's more broader than just the Buddha's teachings. It's all of the teachings that help us find freedom. We can see as all of the wisdom teachings, whatever the tradition, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. It's really taking refuge in the truth as well, the truth about taking refuge in life itself. So I'm going to talk more about refuge in the Dharma. So I'll leave it there for now. Refuge in the Sangha is finding refuge in the community. It can be the community of practitioners committed to the Buddha's teachings. And on a more of an internal level, it's taking refuge in our interconnectedness with all beings and all of life, seeing ourselves part of this web of life. The Buddha, you may have heard, he said, all of spiritual life is Sangha. All of spiritual life is community. And Dr. Martin Luther King recognized, he said that we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, tied in a single garment of destiny. He said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. He said this in his letter from Birmingham jail to pastors who were not walking the talk, as it were, at the time, back in the early 60s. So focusing today on the second of these refuges, taking refuge in the Dharma. Two questions I want to ask. First, what do we mean? What do we really mean by finding refuge in the Dharma? And the second, why is it important? Why is it important, or perhaps even essential, to take refuge in the Dharma? Essential if we're going to realize freedom in this lifetime. For me, taking refuge in the Dharma means to consciously recognize and internalize that the Dharma, that the teachings provide us with a pathway to freedom from suffering in this life. So it's consciously recognizing this and really internalizing it in our lives. That the Dharma, so we can say the Buddha's teachings of freedom, and I'm going to focus mainly on the Buddha's teachings of freedom, which we call the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha Dharma. But the Dharma is broader than the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha Dharma is the Buddhist path to freedom, but it's not the only path to freedom. And so, when I think, if I think of Rumi, his poem about welcoming the guests, that for me, that's Dharma. That's Dharma. That's kind of like, that's a little nugget of, a little jewel of the teachings. Welcome the guests, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who sweep your house empty of its furniture. It's a kind of like, oh yeah, what comes up for us can actually be welcomed as guests. And that's potentially freeing. So that's the Dharma. That's the Dharma. When Rilke, the poet Rilke, talks about always trust in the difficult, always trust in the difficult. Again, that's a nugget, a jewel of teachings, because when it shifts things around, we typically think the difficult is, oh, that's in my way, that blocks me from where I want to go. But when we look at the difficult as, this is the place of waking up, similarly, make the obstacle the path. The obstacle is the path. We turn it around, and in that turning around, if we really internalize it, that is a teaching of Dharma. Obviously the teachings, say, of Jesus, love your neighbor, turn the other cheek. These, again, they invite a kind of radically different way of looking at ourselves, the world, and others. We're saying, oh, I don't have to go, get a bigger stick to hit them with. That's the way. And obviously, in terms of relating to others, but it's more the inner letting go that I think is being pointed to in that teaching. I think of Mary Oliver, her poem, The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, etc. How that, is for me is kind of a teaching of the Dharma, of how we can go from a place of, tightness and contraction and listening to all the noise of the world and believing that's the only way things are, to seeing, oh, we can embark on something new. We can listen to those internal voices. Again, this is the Dharma. I think of Carl Jung, with saying, talking about how what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. And again, that we think, oh yeah, if we don't bring something into the light of awareness, we just keep acting it out unconsciously, and we keep suffering. Again, that's the Dharma teaching. So, I'm thinking, I'm talking about the Dharma as any teaching and life itself. Like the way life can kind of teach us lessons every day of the week. If when the eyes and ears are open, even the leaves on the trees teach like pages of the scriptures. I think Hafiz said that, or somebody said that. Hafiz, or one of those wonderful Sufi kind of poets, and not all Sufis, but some of them are other traditions. But anyway, all of these are teachings of the Dharma. I'm going to focus in, for obvious reasons, on the Buddha Dharma, and how that can support us. But I'm really talking about all of these teachings, and how refuge in the Dharma is recognizing that taking refuge, it provides us a pathway to freedom from suffering in this life. So refuge in the Dharma means being intentional about putting the teachings at the center of our lives. We'll realize the benefits of the teachings only if we make them a priority. And this is kind of the core of what I'm wanting to get at. The way I frame it in my own mind is, the Dharma will support us if we support the Dharma. The Dharma will support. What I mean by that is that the benefits of the teachings will be available to us insofar as we give them centrality in our life. If we don't, then we're not going to be able to benefit, or not to the fullness of what the teachings offer. The teachings can't just be something we go to in times of trouble. When things are difficult. Oh, now I'm going to go to the teaching. What do the teachings have to offer me that can help me get out of this mess that I'm in? Particularly if, the way we're living our lives is disconnected from the teachings. If we're not putting the teachings at the center of our lives, what we will by default be putting other refuges at the center of our life. And typically these other refuges will be things that lead us to suffering. Like if we take refuge in drink or drugs, those are a form of refuge. And we're thinking, oh yeah, I'll be, if I only have a drink, or if I only have a drug, or if I, it may be taking refuge in fame and how we're, our reputation. Oh, how are people looking at me? Are they thinking good things about me? Or it might be money. I've got to have more money, and then I'll really be safe and secure. Or possessions. Or we take refuge in our beliefs, and our opinions about things, and that can be one of the most difficult refuges, because we can get really attached to our beliefs and we hold on to them. I say that the teachings won't be available to us if we don't make them central. And the reason for that is that the strength of our delusions will outweigh the strength of our practice. If we're not putting the teachings at the center, then our unconsciousness will be much stronger than our consciousness, much stronger than our awareness. And in times of difficulty, I think the teachings won't be available to us, or won't be available to us in a deep way. And I'm going to talk in some personal ways of how I came to understand this really strongly in recent years. It's said that in Tibetan Buddhism that there are 84,000 Dharma doors. Obviously, it doesn't mean that literally 84,000. It's actually 82,720. No, but 84,000, that's obviously a symbolic number. But Dharma doors really mean teachings that help us to wake up. There are many, many, many different teachings. I highlighted some of the kind of non-Buddhist ones, and I could pick 100 others as well, as probably you could too. But one teaching is at the very center of all of the Buddha's teachings, and that's the Buddha's teaching on suffering and the end of suffering, the Four Noble Truths. Two, the Buddha talked a lot about suffering and the end of suffering. He said, I teach one thing and one thing alone, suffering and its end. He also, and there's a very well-known quote, he said about the Four Noble Truths, he said, friends, just as the footprint of any living being that walks can be placed within an elephant's footprint, so too all wholesome states or teachings can be included in the Four Noble Truths. So everything comes back to this teaching about suffering and the end of suffering. He also said, one who understands clinging and non-clinging, that's the second and the third noble truth. One who understands clinging and non-clinging understands all the Dharma. So essentially, if we really understand the teaching of the Four Noble Truths about suffering and how we find an end to suffering, that is all the teaching we need. I don't mean that the rest is irrelevant, but that is enough to move us from suffering to freedom. Really understanding and knowing the Four Noble Truths means not just understanding conceptually or cognitively that we can find freedom by letting go of clinging. We have to get to know these teaching very deeply, that when we cling to anything, we suffer. It has to become an embodied knowing through our direct experience, knowing in our bones, really. Teachings have to go deep. So at the heart of these four noble truths is the recognition that when we cling to anything, we suffer, whether it's clinging to our possessions, to our views and opinions, clinging to the people that we hate, that's another form of clinging. Whatever we cling to, whatever we resist and push away, whatever we identify with, we suffer. Or whenever we identify with anything, we suffer. There's suffering. This is the heart of the teachings. And when we let go of clinging, we experience freedom. You let go of, it's very simple. I think it's simple to understand that. I think we all know that when we get caught up, addiction is a very clear kind of extreme example of it, of where we get into that, got to have. But there's many, many other expressions of clinging, including the pushing away things. And I think we can get this and also get how when we kind of open our fists, as it were, we kind of let go, then we experience freedom. Some of you may be familiar with the story, and I think that this is true, that in India and maybe other Asian countries, they have these they have this way of capturing monkeys, who are doing damage and stuff, and the way they do this is there's one of these big seeds that has a hole in it, and they make the hole big enough, just the right size for the monkey to put its hand in, and they put some juicy fruit in there, and so that when that monkey puts its hand in the hole and grasps the juicy fruit, it tries to pull its fist out with the juicy fruit, and it can't. But it won't let go. But it won't let go of the juicy fruit. Doesn't want to let go of it. So it gets captured. And I love that image. And it actually, I believe it is, I think, I've never seen it personally, but I've heard that this is actually what the way they can capture monkeys. And we're not really that very different. Maybe different by a couple of million years, but not very different. When we hold on, in this way, we suffer. And yet when we can open our hands and to just withdraw ourselves from that thing that we're clinging to, then we experience freedom. And this is the heart of the teaching. It's kind of easy to say in a way. I mean, it's fairly simple and not too hard to understand. But when we have to do it in our own lives, when we have to find a way of letting go of our anger or hatred towards a politician who we think is doing harmful things, for some that may be an issue, that it's not, may not be quite so easy to do it, easy to understand, but not necessarily easy to do. So our task with each of these, and I'm highlighting the Buddha's teachings of the Dharma, and I'm highlighting within that, for simple, because it's the central teaching, and because, to give an example, I'm highlighting the Four Noble Truths. There are many other teachings that help us to wake up. I'll just give you a couple of other examples of major teachings that help us to find freedom out of the 84,000. The one is, whenever we're suffering and whatever we're experiencing at any time, that moment, that experience can be the doorway to freedom from suffering. So one way of putting it is the present moment, whatever we're experiencing, that can be the gateway, the doorway, the portal to freedom from suffering. We simply have to open fully to our experience. So what we were doing in the meditation of just allowing whatever is present to be here, to come and go, to see its impermanence, to let go of clinging to anything as I or mine, letting go of the mental stories and narratives, and staying directly with our experience. This is the doorway to freedom. This is what the Buddha spoke of as mindfulness as the direct path to liberation. Mindfulness as the direct path to liberation. So that the present moment, awareness in the present moment of our experience is the doorway, to freedom. Eckhart Tolle put it this way. He said, you can always cope with the present moment, but you cannot cope with something that is only a mind projection. You cannot cope with the future. So emphasizing that the present moment. So this is the teachings of mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness. Is another central teaching that is a gateway to freedom. We can include or to the heart practices, the practices of the what are called the Brahma Viharas, or the divine abodes, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. These teachings are crucial because it's often said it's like a bird needs two wings to fly, right? Similarly, in our practice, the teachings need two wings. They need the wing of wisdom and the wing of compassion. The Four Noble Truths is fundamentally the wisdom teachings, the insight, the understanding teachings. The heart practices are the heart teachings, the compassion teachings, the other wing of the bird. So these are just some of the central teachings of the Buddha, which we call the Buddha Dharma, that help us find freedom in our lives. You know, maybe it's a little freedom. Excuse me. Maybe it's a lot of freedom. Maybe it's complete freedom, as Ajahn Chah said. Let go a little, experience a little peace, little freedom. Let go a lot, you'll experience a lot of peace. Let go completely and you'll experience complete peace. Your struggle with the world will be at an end. So what I want to do in the final part of the talk today is, having laid out something of the kind of, this is what taking refuge in the Dharma means, and some thoughts on why it's important to take refuge in the Dharma, take refuge in the teachings. I want to talk about a personal experience that really taught me the importance of taking refuge in the Dharma. And it really taught me through failure, through not being able to find refuge. And so the insights that I gained through this experience came with a lot of difficulty. I had an experience a few years ago. Some of you may kind of remember this time, where I found myself overwhelmed by the amount of work that I had taken on, and not knowing how I would be able to do it all. I felt I just didn't have the resources to be able to respond to all the demands that I felt were coming my way. And what came up for me was a great deal of fear and anxiety. And, what would you say if I were to say, well, how do you work with fear and anxiety when they come up? Or how do you work with anything, anger or grief or whatever? What do you do? I think probably most of you say, well, the teachings tell us we should turn towards that experience and allow ourselves to really feel it and be present with it. Everything I've been saying in the last 25 minutes or so, that's the way of turning to our experience, and that's ultimately the way of finding freedom in the midst of whatever we're experiencing. But did I do that? No, I had a better way. My response to this sense of kind of overwhelm and burnout and, whatever, what name I want to give it, was to resist. This wasn't something I wanted to have happen. And I tried to hold on for dear life and kept on pushing through. It was as though, I thought, if I keep on pushing, if I keep on pushing forward, I'd somehow come to the other end of this unpleasantness and everything would be okay. Do you think that happened? but the more I pushed, the more tight, the more contracted, the more anxious and fearful I became. I remember very clearly having images in my mind of driving on a freeway and seeing an exit sign that said, exit here, exit here, get off, stop, just stop. But did I stop? No, I didn't stop. I kept on pushing. And I kept on pushing literally until in the end, I couldn't push anymore. And I just, it basically my body said no, and I had to give up. But this wasn't the kind of, giving up that you might talk about as, like you see, as kind of spiritual surrender, where we really do let go and we say, God or whoever it might be, you're in charge from here. I'm letting go of this. It wasn't that kind of letting go. It was a sense of failure, and it came with a lot of shame. Yeah, definitely a sense of failure. And I for a while I was in a very dark place. A kind of a lot of feeling of depression. And one of the hardest parts about this experience was that I couldn't access the teachings. I knew them in my head, but I couldn't internalize them, and I couldn't really practice them. I couldn't access the practice of meditation. I could kind of go through the what do you call it? Go through the words, lost my word. Go through the, as though I were doing it, but wouldn't be real. Go through the motions, but it wasn't really. I couldn't really meditate in a genuine way, even though I'd been practicing for almost pretty much daily for 30 years. I couldn't access the teachings. So it was a very, very painful place to be. It wasn't that I'd given up on the teachings, but it was just that it was like I was over here on this land here, and on the other side of the teachings with all that they had to offer. But there was a raging river in between that I couldn't cross. That's just, given give it in it an image. I could see how helpful, I could understand and had experienced in the past how helpful the teachings were and could be, but they weren't available to me at that time. Over time, I came to see how my resistance to stopping, that keep on pushing, was a false refuge that I'd taken refuge in, thinking that I could push through. I'm reminded of when I was thinking of this last night, I'm reminded of a beautiful quote from Anais Nin that you might be familiar with. She says, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." That's the kind of positive end of it, is when we realize that it's harder, it's more painful to stay in the tight place than to blossom. But where I was at this time was I didn't recognize that. I thought the place of refuge, a place to hold on to, was that tight place. This was kind of the fearful place I was in, that I would just hold on and I could just push through. Whatever things earlier in my life had conditioned me to do that. My mother was an example with 9 kids, bringing, of that kind of determination. And it has a good side, obviously. You keep going and you survive, but it also has a shadow side. And I was stuck in the shadow of this. I was not, on that quote, from Anais Nin, the bud risking to blossom, risking blossom. ultimately I found my way, to back to both, psychological well-being, and 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 to the Dharma, and to be able to access the Dharma. Obviously, I found my way back to that. And I learned a great deal through the suffering. And one of the most important things I learned was that my suffering was avoidable if I had truly taken refuge in the Dharma, in the teachings, in what life was telling me, and what all those signals that were coming to me of like, stop, get off, get off. And yet I pushed and pushed. I think a lot of the time we learn through suffering. Perhaps most of the time, our learning, our insight comes through suffering. But when we take refuge in the Dharma, we have the potential to avoid the suffering. The more I, retrospectively, if I had invested more deeply in the Dharma, in the teachings, and not allowed the conditions to arise to kind of become disconnected from them, then I could have avoided that situation from arising. Now, in the larger sense, I feel completely understanding. I'm not beating myself up about it. And I understand that that's what I had to learn, and that's the way I had to go through it. But if I step up to a META level, a meta level, I can see that, the more we invest in the centrality of the teachings, the more we're able to avoid what the Buddha talked about, preventing the arising of unwholesome states, and to be able to really take the signals. And when you see the billboard that says, get off here, please get off here, then to get off rather than, driving ahead until you hit the wall in the end. So I shared the story in the hope that it will be helpful, a helpful pointer to the importance of really taking refuge in the Dharma, really investing our time, our energy, our heart and spirit in the Dharma, in the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of the other wisdom teachings that help us find freedom from suffering. The alternative is that we'll seek for and find false refuges, and we'll continue on that cycle of suffering. So where I want to finish is with maybe just a couple of minutes of reflection for us all here on taking refuge in the Dharma. And you can, if you want to, you can close your eyes for this and just let your attention come inward. And I want to just ask the question, what would it mean for you to take refuge in the Dharma? To really give it centrality, importance in your life. We all know we're living in very difficult and challenging times, and we need the refuge of the wisdom teachings and compassion teachings, the teachings of those who've walked the path before us and can point out the potholes and the exits and remind us to pay attention. So it's easy to recognize that on a cognitive level. But what I'm wanting to get at is, what would it mean to let that understanding go really deep for you? What would taking refuge in the Dharma mean to you? Would it mean changing anything? Would it mean doing anything different in your practice? And I'm not asking this in any way from the standpoint of shoulds, I should do this, I should. It's not should, you know, not about shoulds at all, but about what will serve me, to, to let go of holding on, to let go of clinging, and to find to find greater freedom in my life, particularly in these, very difficult times that we're living in, where there's so much to trigger us, so much to get us caught up in various kinds of dukkha. So maybe just take a quiet minute to just sit with that. So thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that's helpful. Maybe some food for thought, grist for the mill, um, particularly as we begin the new year.